September 5. My darling Varenka, I have received a great number of impressions this morning, my angel. To begin with, I had a headache all day. To freshen myself up a bit, I went for a walk along Fontanka. It was such a damp, dark evening. By 6 o'clock it was getting dusk. That is what we are coming to now. It was not raining, but there was mist equal to a good rain. There were broad, long stretches of storm cloud across the sky. There were masses of people walking along the canal bank, and, as ill luck would have it, the people had such horrible, depressing faces. Drunken peasants, snub-nosed Finnish women in high boots with nothing on their heads, workmen, cab drivers, people like me out on some errand, boys, a carpenter's apprentice in a striped dressing gown, thin and wasted-looking, with his face bathed in smutty oil, and a lock in his hand. A discharged soldier, 7 feet high, waiting for somebody to buy a penknife or a bronze ring from him. That was a sort of crowd. It seems it was an hour when no other sort of people could be about. Fontanka is a canal for traffic, such a mass of barges that one wonders how there can be room for them all. On the bridges there are women sitting with wet gingerbread and rotten apples, and they all of them looked so muddy, so drenched. It's dreary walking along Fontanka. The wet granite under one's feet, with the tall, black, sooty houses on both sides, fog underfoot and fog overhead. How dark and melancholy it was this evening. When I went back to Gorshkov Street, it was already getting dark, and they had begun lighting the gas. I have not been in Gorshkov Street for quite a long while. I haven't happened to go there. It's a noisy street. What shops, what magnificent establishments! Everything is simply shining and resplendent. Materials, flowers under glass, hats of all sorts with ribbons. One would fancy they were all displayed as a show. But no, you know there are people who buy all those things and present them to their wives. It's a wealthy street. There are a great many German bakers in Gorshkov Street, so they must be a very prosperous set of people, too. What numbers of carriages roll by every minute! I wonder the paving is not worn out. Such gorgeous equipages, windows shining like mirrors, silk and velvet inside, and aristocratic footmen wearing epaulets and carrying a sword. I glanced into all the carriages. There were always ladies in them, dressed up to the nines, perhaps countesses and princesses. No doubt it was the hour when they were all hastening to balls and assemblies. It would be interesting to get a closer view of princesses and ladies of rank in general. It must be very nice. I have never seen them, except just as today, a passing glance at their carriages. I thought of you then. Ah, my darling, my own, when I think of you, my heart begins aching. Why are you so unlucky, my Varenka? You are every bit as good as any of them. You are good, lovely, well-educated. Why has such a cruel fortune fallen to your lot? Why does it happen that a good man is left forlorn and forsaken, while happiness seems thrust upon another? I know, my dear, that it's wrong to think that it's free thinking. But to speak honestly, to speak the whole truth, why is it fate, like a raven, croaks good fortune for one still unborn, while another begins life in the orphan asylum? And you know it often happens that Ivan the Fool is favored by fortune. You, Ivan the Fool, rummage in the family money-bags, eat, drink, and be merry, while you, so-and-so, can lick your lips. That's all you are fit for, you, brother so-and-so. It's a sin, my darling, it's a sin to think like that. But sometimes one cannot help sin creeping into one's heart. You ought to be driving in such a carriage, my own little dearie. Generals should be craving the favor of a glance from you, not the likes of us. You ought to be dressed in silk and gold, instead of a little old linen gown. You would not be a thin, delicate little thing as you are now, but like a little sugar figure, fresh, plump, and rosy. And then I should be happy simply to look in at you from the street through the brightly lighted windows, simply to see your shadow. The thought that you were happy and gay, my pretty little bird, would be enough to make me gay too. But as it is not enough that spiteful people have ruined you. A worthless, profligate wretch goes and insults you. Because his coat hangs smartly on him, because he stares at you from a golden eyeglass, the shameless fellow, he can do what he likes, and one must listen to what he says indulgently, however unseemly it is. Wait a bit. Is it really so, my pretty gentleman? And why is all this? Because you are an orphan, because you are defenseless, because you have no powerful friend to help and protect you. And what can one call people who are ready to insult an orphan? They are worthless beasts, not men, simply trash. They are mere ciphers and have no real existence. Of that I am convinced. That's what they are like, these people, and to my thinking, my own, the hurdy-gurdy man I met today in Gorshkov Street is more worthy of respect than they are. He goes about the whole day long, hoping to get some wretched spare farthing for food, but he is his own master. He does earn his own living. He won't ask for charity, but he works like a machine wound up to give pleasure. Here, he says, I can do what I can to give pleasure. He's a beggar, it is true. He's a beggar all the same, but he's an honorable beggar. He is cold and weary, but still he works, though it's in his own way, still he works. And there are many honest men, my darling, who, though they earn very little in proportion to the amount and usefulness of their work, yet they bow down to no one, and buy their bread of no one. Here I am, just like that hurdy-gurdy man. That is, not at all like him, but in my own sense, in an honorable and aristocratic sense, just as he does. To the best of my abilities, I work as I can. Well, that's enough about me. It's neither here nor there. I speak of that hurdy-gurdy, my darling, because it has happened that I have felt my poverty twice as much today. I stopped to look at the hurdy-gurdy man. I was in such a mood that I stopped to distract my thoughts. I was standing there, and also 2 cab drivers, a woman of some sort, and a little girl, such a grubby little thing. The hurdy-gurdy man stopped before the windows of a house. I noticed a little boy about 10 years old. He would have been pretty, but he looked so ill, so frail, with hardly anything but his shirt on, and almost barefoot, with his mouth open. He was listening to the music, like a child. He watched the Germans' dolls dancing, while his own hands and feet were numb with cold. He shivered and nibbled the edge of his sleeve. I noticed that he had a bit of paper of some sort in his hands. A gentleman passed and flung the hurdy-gurdy man some small coin, which fell straight into the box in a little garden in which a toy Frenchman was dancing with the ladies. At the clink of the coin, the boy started, looked round, and evidently thought that I had given the money. He ran up to me, his little hands trembling, his little voice trembling. He held the paper out to me and said, "A letter." I opened the letter. Well, it was the usual thing, saying, "Kind gentleman, a mother's dying with 3 children hungry, so help us now as I am dying. I will pay for you, my benefactor, in the next world, for not forgetting my babes now." Well, what of it? One can see what it meant, an everyday matter. But what could I give him? Well, I gave him nothing, and how sorry I was. The boy was poor, blue with cold, perhaps hungry too, and not lying. Surely he was not lying. I know that for certain. But what is wrong is that these horrid mothers don't take care of their children and send them out half naked in the cold to beg. Maybe she's a weak-willed, silly woman, and there's no one, maybe, to do anything for her, so she simply sits with her legs tucked under her. Maybe she's really ill. Well, anyway, she should apply in the proper quarter. Though maybe she's a cheat and sends a hungry, delicate child out on purpose to deceive people and makes him ill. And what sort of training is it for a poor boy? It simply hardens his heart. He runs about begging. People pass and have no time for him. Their hearts are stony. Their words are cruel. "Get away! Go along! You are naughty!" That is what he hears from everyone, and the child's heart grows hard, and in vain the poor little frightened boy shivers with cold like a fledgling fallen out of a broken nest. His hands and feet are frozen. He gasps for breath. The next thing he is coughing. Before long disease, like an unclean reptile, creeps into his bosom, and death is standing over him in some dark corner. No help, no escape, and that's his life. That is what life is like sometimes. Oh, Varenka, it's wretched to hear. For Christ's sake, and to pass by and give nothing, telling him, "God will provide." Sometimes, for Christ's sake, is all right. It's not always the same, you know, Varenka. Sometimes it's a long, drawling, habitual practice, regular beggar's whine. It's not so painful to refuse one like that. He's an old hand, a beggar by profession. He's accustomed to it, one thinks. He can cope with it and knows how to cope with it. Sometimes, for Christ's sake, sounds unaccustomed, rude, terrible. As today, when I was taking the letter from that boy, a man standing close to the fence, not begging from everyone, said to me, "Give us a halfpenny, sir, for Christ's sake," and in such a harsh, jerky voice that I started with a horrible feeling and did not give him a halfpenny. I hadn't one. Rich people don't like the poor to complain aloud of their harsh lot. They say they disturb them, they are troublesome. Yes, indeed, poverty is always troublesome. Maybe their hungry groans hinder the rich from sleeping. To make a confession, my own, I began to describe all this to you partly to relieve my heart, but chiefly to give you an example of the fine style of my composition. For you have no doubt noticed yourself, my dear girl, that of late my style has been forming, but such a depression came over me that I began to pity my feelings to the depth of my soul. And though I know, my dear, that one gets no good by self-pity, yet one must do oneself justice in some way, and often, my own, for no reason whatever, one literally annihilates oneself, makes oneself of no account and not worth a straw. And perhaps that is why it happens that I am panic-stricken and persecuted like that poor boy who asked me for alms. Now, I will tell you, by way of instance and illustration, Varenka. Listen. Hurrying to the office early in the morning, my own, I sometimes look at the town, how it wakes, gets up, begins smoking, hurrying with life, resounding. Sometimes you feel so small before such a sight that it is as though someone had given you a flip on your intrusive nose, and you creep along your way noiseless as water and humble as grass and hold your peace. Now, just look into it and see what is going on in those great black smutty buildings. Get to the bottom of that, and then judge whether one was right to abuse oneself for no reason and to be reduced to undignified mortification. Note, Varenka, that I am speaking figuratively, not in a literal sense. But let us look what is going on in those houses. There, in some smoky corner, in some damp hole which, through poverty, passes as a lodging, some workman wakes up from his sleep, and all night he has been dreaming of boots, for instance, which he had accidentally slit the day before, as though a man ought to dream of such nonsense. But he's an artisan, he's a shoemaker. It's excusable for him to think of nothing but his own subject. His children are crying, and his wife is hungry. And it's not only shoemakers who get up in the morning like that, my own. That would not matter, and would not be worth writing about. But this is the point, Varenka. Close by, In the same house, in a story higher or lower, a wealthy man in his gilded apartments dreams at night, it may be, of those same boots. That is, boots in a different manner, in a different sense, but still boots. For in the sense I am using the word, Varenka, every one of us is a bit of a shoemaker, my darling. And that would not matter, only it's a pity there is no one at that wealthy person's side, no man who could whisper in his ear, "Come, give over thinking of such things, thinking of nothing but yourself, living for nothing but yourself. Your children are healthy, your wife is not begging for food. Look about you, can't you see some object more noble to worry about than your boots?" That's what I wanted to say to you in a figurative way, Varenka. Perhaps it's too free a thought, my own, but sometimes one has that thought. Sometimes it comes to one, and one cannot help its bursting out of one's heart in warm language. And so it seems there was no reason to make oneself so cheap, and to be scared by mere noise and uproar. I will conclude by saying, Varenka, that perhaps you think what I am saying is unjust, or that I am suffering from a fit of the spleen, or that I have copied this out of some book. No, my dear girl, you must dismiss that idea. It is not that. I abominate injustice. I am not suffering from spleen, and I've not copied anything out of a book. So there. I went home in a melancholy frame of mind. I sat down to the table and heated my teapot to have a glass or two of tea. Suddenly I saw coming towards me Gorshkov, our poor lodger. I had noticed in the morning that he kept hanging about round the other lodgers and trying to approach me. And I may say in passing, Varenka, that they live ever so much worse than I do. Yes, indeed, he has a wife and children, so that if I were in his place, I don't know what I should do. Well, my Gorshkov comes up to me, bows to me, a running tear as always on his eyelashes. He scrapes with his foot and can't utter a word. I made him sit down on a chair. It was a broken one, it is true, but there was no other. I offered him some tea. He refused from politeness, refused for a long time, but at last he took a glass. He would have drunk it without sugar, began apologizing again when I tried to persuade him that he must have sugar. He argued for a long time, kept refusing, but at last put the very smallest lump of sugar in his glass, and began declaring that his tea was extremely sweet. Oh, to what degradation poverty does reduce people! "Well, my good friend, what is it?" I said. "Well, it is like this, Makar Alexievich, my benefactor," he said. "Show the mercy of the Lord. Come to the help of my unhappy family. My wife and children have nothing to eat. Think what it is for me, their father," said he. I tried to speak, but he interrupted me. "I am afraid of every one here, Makar Alexievich. That is, not exactly afraid, but as it were ashamed with them. They are all proud and haughty people. I would not have troubled you, my benefactor. I know that you have been in difficulties yourself. I know you can't give me much, but do lend me a trifle, and I make bold to ask you," said he, "because I know your kind heart. I know that you are in need yourself, that you know what trouble is now, and so your heart feels compassion." He ended by saying, "Forgive my boldness and unmannerliness, Makar Alexievich." I answered him that I should be heartily glad, but that I had nothing, absolutely nothing. "Makar Alexievich, sir," said he, "I am not asking for much, but you see it is like this." Then he flushed crimson. "My wife, my children, hungry. If only a 10-kopeck piece." Well, it sent a twinge to my heart. Why, I thought, they are worse off than I even. 20 kopecks was all I had left, and I was reckoning on it. I meant to spend it next day on my most pressing needs. "No, my dear fellow, I can't. It's like this," I said.
"Makar Alexievitch, my dear soul, what you like," he said, "if it is only 10 kopecks."
Well, I took my 20 kopecks out of my box, Varenka, and gave it him. It's a good deed, anyway. Ah, poverty! I had a good talk with him. "Why, how is it, my good soul," I said, "that you are in such want, and yet you rent a room for 5 silver roubles?" He explained to me that he had taken it 6 months before, and paid for it 6 months in advance. And since then circumstances had been such that the poor fellow does not know which way to turn. He expected his case would be over by this time. It's an unpleasant business. You see, Varenka, he has to answer for something before the court. He is mixed up in a case with a merchant who swindled the government over a contract. The cheat was discovered, and the merchant was arrested, and he's managed to implicate Gorshkov, who had something to do with it too. But in reality Gorshkov was only guilty of negligence, of injudiciousness, and unpardonable disregard of the interests of government. The case has been going on for some years. Gorshkov has had to face all sorts of difficulties.
"I'm not guilty, not the least guilty, of the dishonesty attributed to me," said Gorshkov. "I am not guilty of swindling and robbery."
This case has thrown a slur on his character. He has been turned out of the service, and though he has not been found guilty of any legal crime yet, till he has completely cleared himself, he cannot recover from the merchant a considerable sum of money due to him, which is now the subject of dispute before the courts. I believe him, but the court won't take his word for it. The case is all in such a coil and a tangle that it would take 100 years to unravel it. As soon as they untie one knot, the merchant brings forward another, and then another. I feel the deepest sympathy for Gorshkov, my own. I am very sorry for him. The man's out of work. He won't be taken anywhere without a character. All they had saved has been spent on food. The case is complicated, and meanwhile they have had to live, and meanwhile, apropos of nothing, and most inappropriately, a baby has been born, and that is an expense. His son fell ill. Expense. Died. Expense. His wife is ill. He's afflicted with some disease of long standing. In fact, he has suffered to the utmost. He says, however, that he is expecting a favorable conclusion to his business in a day or two, and that there is no doubt of it now. I am sorry for him. I am sorry for him. I am very sorry for him, Varenka. I was kind to him. He's a poor, lost, scared creature. He needs a friend, so I was kind to him. Well, goodbye, my dear one. Christ be with you. Keep well. My darling, when I think of you, it's like laying a salve on my sore heart. And though I suffer for you, yet it eases my heart to suffer for you. Your true friend, Makar Deyavushkin.